Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Long Island Radio Magazine. I'm Frank Sundrum. It's almost summer, and we're thinking about hitting the road, traveling down a cultural lane with Jack Kerouac next on the Long Island Radio Magazine. Welcome back. Remember On the Road? Jack Kerouac writing about the allure of the open road, the hope and the ecstasy that lay somewhere beyond the horizon, echoing in the hills and hollows of our own mythology. This afternoon, our own poet-in-residence travels down some back roads, looking back at the Beat Generation through the voice of Jack Kerouac.
Hi, this is Dan Moran, resident poet and host of Poets Corner here on WPBX. Today on the Long Island Radio Magazine, you'll be hearing a special program on the Beat Generation, and in particular the man who defined it, Jack Kerouac. The writers of the Beat movement constituted not only the preeminent literary movement of the American 20th century, but also laid the groundwork for a social revolution which marked America's coming of age. In the early 1940s, a group of friends with a common love of reading and writing began a new direction in literature, and indeed social philosophy, from tiny flats in Manhattan, which within 15 years arose to shake American culture to its foundations. The early 50s was the age of I Like Ike, Joe McCarthy and Richard Nixon, Levittown, the Cold War, and cars with lots of fins and chrome. Conformity was king, and Elvis was obscene. The frontier was closed. But in that darkness, a new galaxy was forming which had at its center a quiet, thoughtful, and talented man who, without any conscious effort, would begin a revolution which still persists some 50 years later. Jack Kerouac was born in 1922 in the Massachusetts industrial town of Lowell, the son of a printer. Just prior to World War II, he received a football scholarship to Columbia University and moved to New York City. One short year later, he was out of school and trying hard to find his way, spending every spare moment reading or writing. In the early 40s, he met Allen Ginsberg, a poet, and William Burroughs. Together, and with several others, they shared ideas, spoke of the great writers like Thomas Wolfe and Whitman, and encouraged each other to write and think. Kerouac's unique talent and perspective was immediate and apparent to those who read his lovely works. Like Wolfe, his writing was full of ideas and adventures and words which danced upon the page, summoning sound and smell and color and insight. He embraced life with both arms and reveled at both the joy and the mystery of existence. His single greatest influence became the hallmark of his style, that being his love of jazz music, jazz musicians, and the bohemian nature of their world. The principles of bop, as practiced by Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Mingus, and Thelonious Monk, were used by Kerouac in his prose. Rhythm, spontaneity, and the trust of one's deepest instincts were applied to writing. He described his style as spontaneous bop prosody and wrote entire novels in only weeks. Listen as he performs a piece entitled The Beat Generation, which was recorded in 1959.
Now it's jazz. The place is roaring. All beautiful girls in there. One mad brunette at the bar, drunk with her boys. One strange chick I remember from somewhere wearing a simple skirt with pockets, her hands in there. Short haircut, slouched, talking to everybody. Up and down the stairs they come. The bartenders are the regular band of Jack and the heavenly drummer who looks up in the sky with blue eyes, with a beard. He's wailing beer caps of bottles and jamming at the cash register, and everything is going to the beat. It's the beat generation. It's Bayat. It's the beat to keep. It's the beat of the heart. It's being beat and down in the world, and like old-time lowdown, and like in ancient civilizations, the slave boatmen rowing galleys to a beat, and servants spinning pottery to a beat. The faces There's no face to compare with Jack Minger's, who's up on the bandstand now with a colored trumpeter who outblows him wild and dizzy, but Jack's face overlooking all the heads and smoke. He has a face that looks like everybody you've ever known and seen on the street in your time. Sweet face, hard to describe. Sad eyes, cruel lips, expectant gleam, swaying to the beat, tall, majestical, waiting in front of the drugstore. A face like Hunky's in New York. Hunky, whom you'll see on Times Square, somnolent and alert, sad, sweet, dark, holy, just out of jail, martyred, tortured by sidewalks, starved for sex and companionship, open to anything, ready to introduce a new world with a shrug. The colored big tenor with the big tone is blowing Sonny Stitz clear out of Kansas City roadhouses. Clear, heavy, somewhat dull and unmusical ideas which nevertheless never leave the music. Always there, always far out. The harmony too complicated for the motley bums of music understanding in there. But the musicians here. The drummer is a sensational 12-year-old Negro boy who's not allowed to drink, but can play. Tremendous, a little lithe, childlike Miles Davis kid, like early Fats Navarro fans you used to see in Espan Harlem, hep, small. He thunders at the drums with a beat which is described to me by a near-standing connoisseur with beret as a fabulous beat. On piano is Blondie Bill, good enough to drive any group. Now Jack Minger blows out and over his head with these angels from Fillmore. I dig him. Now he's terrific. I just stand in the outside hall against the wall. No beer necessary, with collections of in-and-out listeners, with Bernie, and now here returns Bob Berman, who's a kid from West Indies, who barged into my party 6 months earlier with Dean and the gang, and I had a Chet Baker record on, and we hoofed it at each other in the room. Tremendous. The perfect grace of his dancing, casual, like Joe Louis, casually hoofing. He comes now in dancing like that, glad. Everybody looks everywhere. It's a jazz joint and Beat Generation mad trick. You see someone, hi. Then you look away elsewhere for something, someone else. It's all insane. Then you look back, you look away, around. Everything is coming in from everywhere in the sound of the jazz. Hi, hey. Bang, the little drummer takes a solo, reaching his young hands all over traps and kettles and cymbals and foot pedal, boom, in a fantastic crash of sound. 12 years old. What will happen?
His first novel, The Town and the City, reflected the voice of his idol, Thomas Wolfe. Kerouac said of Wolfe, quote, "He woke me up to America as a poem instead of a place to struggle around and sweat in. That dark-eyed poet made me want to prowl and roam and see the real America that had never been uttered." Kerouac's biographer, Ann Charters, said of him, "Jack Kerouac's sound is probably the most individual thing about him, as unique as his thumbprint. Like Gertrude Stein, he wrote by ear, not eye, which is to say that on the printed page, what meets your eye is not only what it seems. A writer's language always adds up to more than the sum of its parts, but Kerouac's sound is an extra dividend. It's the most complete expression of his intended meaning, its oral immediacy at once both simpler and more suggestive than his words on the page. When we read his books, we can approximate the sound of his prose poetry by internalizing his words with our own voice. But we are rank amateurs at this compared to Kerouac. No question here, the man who heard it first says it best. Listen to the voice on these records. Kerouac, read aloud by Kerouac, is the quintessential Kerouac. The freest American English ever spoken in our century by a writer from French-Canadian Lowell, Massachusetts, by way of New York City's 52nd Street. And that's just one way it sounds. What do you hear? Poet Allen Ginsberg said of Kerouac, "Kerouac, a seminal poet in 1950, seeded the inspiration of young bards like Philip Whalen, Gary Snyder, Lou Welch, Michael McClure, Peter Orlovsky, myself, and Robert Creeley, now matured. Also was much admired by Charles Olson and Robert Duncan for his prose poetry sketches in Visions of Cody. Many generations of New York poets absorbed his magical elan. Ted Berrigan, Ann Waldman, Ron Padgett, Tom Clark, Bob Rosenthal, Mike Skolnick, and Vincent Katz. Also generations of San Francisco and Boulder poets continuing to enjoy Eastern and Western mind in Kerouac's lineage, with further influence of living lamas and Zen masters. Word minstrel Bob Dylan credits Kerouac with turning him on to poetry. Quote, "Someone handed me a copy of Mexico City Blues in St. Paul in 1959, and it blew my mind. Why? It was the first poetry that talked to me in my own language." Yet Kerouac's poetry is rarely included in standard anthologies, having been denounced by many critics. The same year, it blew Dylan's mind. Kerouac knew spontaneity in jazz, unafraid and charming. His blues and haikus remain for me the classic of all beat-era jazz poetry recordings, yet to be matched for delighted recitation, verve of pronunciation, deep color of vowels and consonantal bite, exquisite, intelligent consciousness in crossing T's and tonguing D's against the teeth with wide-open lips. Though I'm often credited with innovating American poetic vocalization, my own guru for savoring vowels and appreciating consonants and harking melodious, asonantal, extended cadence is directly Jack Kerouac, originator of that style of poetic oratory. His diction's marvelous, learned by eyesight from Shakespeare, the color of his poetic inflection humorous, sophisticated, worldly, humane, indulgent, and huge, as he notes, of Charlie Parker's mind. His exuberance and complete intelligence with the natural genius of U.S. tongue has gone around the world, affecting poetic and personal style in every literate nation, even washed over the Great Wall of China. The evidence is in your ears.
Friday afternoon in the universe, in all directions, in and out, you got your men, women, dogs, children, horses, pones, ticks, perts, parts, pans, pools, pauls, pails, parturiences, and petty thieveries that turn into heavenly Buddha. I know, boy, what's I talking about, 'cause I made the world, and when I made it, I no lie had a Lucian Midnight for my name and concocted up a world so nothing you had forever thereafter make believe it's real. But that's all right, because now everything will be all right, and we'll soothe the forever boys and girls, and before we're through, we'll find a name for this darn golden eternity and tell a story, too. But you ever read a story as vast as this that begins Friday afternoon with working men on scaffolds painting white paint, and ants murlaying in little black dens, and microbes warring in your kidney, and messerules microbing in the innards of Mercury, and microbes dreaming of the ultimate microbehood, which then ultimates outward to the endless, vast, empty atom, which is this imaginary universe, ending nowhere, and never even born, as Bankei well polled when he ferried his mother over the rocks to Twat UT, and people visit his hut to inquire, what other planet features this? And he answers, what other planet? Though the sounds of the entire world are now swimming through this window from Mrs. Mercadiola's Twando, and old Poke's home drunk again, and of course you hear the cats wailing in the whale bar, wild bar, wart fence, moonlight, midnight, Lucian, Dolphine, immensity visions of the Tathagata, seat of purity and womb. And so that here is all this infinite immaterial, meadow-like golden ash swarming in our enlightened brains, and the silence shifallying in our endless ear, and still we refuse, naked and blank, to hear what, the who? The who? To what, you? We'll say the diamond boat and Persipine, Recipine, Milltown, Heroine, and Fac matches the silver ages everlasting, swarm swallowing in a simple broom, and at night you raise the square white light from your ghost beneath the root-drinking tree, and coyote won't hear you, but you'll ward off the inexistent sea devils, just to pass the time away, and meanwhile it's timeless to the ends of the last light year. It might as well be getting late Friday afternoon where we start, so's old Sound can come home when works are done, and drink his beer, and tweak his children's eyes.
Early and on the road, Kerouac speaks of the meeting of Carlo Marx, who was Allen Ginsberg, and Dean Moriarty, who was Neil Cassidy in real life. Dean was the hero of his novel and was, in Kerouac's mind, the embodiment of the great American intellectual adventure who traveled the country in a great big black Cadillac and met all sorts of unusual people and circumstances. And this is speaking about the early days in On the Road when Kerouac saw Neil Cassidy, who he's calling Dean Moriarty, and Allen Ginsberg, who he's calling Carlo Marx, when they met for the first time in New York Dean Moriarty was working in a parking garage, and this is where the two meet as Dean Moriarty is getting off from work. This is from On the Road. "That's right, man, now you're talking." And a kind of holy lightning I saw flashing from his excitement and his visions, which he described so torrentially that people in buses looked around to see the overexcited nut. In the West, he'd spent a third of his time in the pool hall, a third in jail, and a third in the public library. They'd seen him rushing eagerly down the winter streets, bareheaded, carrying books to the pool hall, or climbing trees to get into the attics of buddies where he spent days reading or hiding from the law. We went to New York. I forget what the situation was. 2 colored girls. There were no girls there. They were supposed to meet him in a diner and didn't show up. We went to his parking lot where he had a few things to do. Change his clothes in the shack and back and spruce up a bit in front of a cracked mirror and so on. And then we took off. And that was the night Dean met Carlo Marx. A tremendous thing happened when Dean met Carlo Marx. 2 keen minds that they are, they took to each other at the drop of a hat. 2 piercing eyes glanced into 2 piercing eyes, the holy con man with the shining mind, and the sorrowful, poetic con man with the dark mind that is Carlo Marx. From that moment on, I saw very little of Dean, and I was a little sorry, too. Their energies met head-on. I was a lout compared. I couldn't keep up with them. The whole mad swirl of everything that was to come began then. It would mix up all my friends and all that I had left of my family in a big dust cloud over the American night. Carlo told him of Old Bull Lee, Elmer Hassel, Jane, Lee in Texas growing weed, Hassel on Rikers Island, Jane wandering on Times Square in a Benzedrine hallucination with her baby girl in her arms and ending up in Bellevue. And Dean told Carlo of unknown people in the West like Tommy Snark, the club-footed pool hall rotation shark, and card player and queer saint. He told him of Roy Johnson, Big Ed Dunkel, his boyhood buddies, his street buddies, his innumerable girls and sex parties and pornographic pictures, his heroes, heroines, adventures. They rushed down the street together, digging everything in the early way they had, which later became so much sadder and perceptive and blank. But then they danced down the street like dingle-doties, and I shambled after as I've been doing all my life, after people who interest me, because the only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time, the ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, burn, burn like fabulous yellow Roman candles exploding like spiders across the stars, and in the middle you see the blue center light pop, and everybody goes, oh. The term Beat Generation came about during a conversation between Kerouac and writer John Cleland Holmes in the early 50s. In an interview in 1959, when asked by Steve Allen how he would define the word beat, Kerouac hesitated for only a moment and said, sympathetic. And he was. Sympathetic to the entire universe around him, the people, the joy, the incredible sadness of mortality. In alleys and train yards in the mountains, or in the passenger seat of a big black car, he drank it all in and reported his findings with a voice never heard before. A review by a stand-in at the New York Times, Gilbert Milstein, called On the Road, quote, an authentic work of art and a major novel which would define a generation. 2 weeks later, the Times reversed themselves with a second review which scathingly referred to Kerouac as a Neanderthal. He was a threat to every establishment America could offer, and they were very quick to strike out at him. Kerouac, the novelist, just discovered after having written 12 novels between 1949 and 1956. From the beginning, the Beats experimented with writing and thinking and living, much of which was augmented by alcohol and a cornucopia of consciousness-altering drugs, many of which were taken from the bohemian attitudes of the jazz world, where musicians were experimenting with the likes of marijuana and heroin as early as the 1920s. The discovery of the drug Benzedrine, or speed as it was later called, allowed endless hyperkinetic energy without the need for sleep. The chronicle of Kerouac's adventures and his hero Neil Cassidy amounted to some 1,000 unpunctuated pages written on a teletype roll in some 21 days. Its publication in 1957, some 7 years later, made Kerouac a pop icon and laid down the tablets which led to the music of Bob Dylan, the Beatles, the Grateful Dead, the Doors, Steely Dan, Tom Waits, the comic Lenny Bruce, and every writer to follow was in some way influenced by the beat attitude. The entire social fabric of the 60s, including JFK, the civil rights movement, the summer of love, the sexual revolution, and the great social upheaval of the 60s and 70s were made possible by the new perspective of life presented by the beat subculture. Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead said of Kerouac, quote, "A germinal moment for me was back when I was in high school going to the San Francisco Art Institute on weekends, just when the words Beat Generation began hitting the papers. We asked my teacher, Wally Hedrick, about the phrase, and he said, well, there's this book, On the Road, and it's all in there. I was an impressionable San Franciscan, really taken with the North Beach scene, and this stuff began to surface. Then in the next couple of years, I read Kerouac, and I recall in '59 hanging out with a friend who had a Kerouac record, and I remember being impressed. I'd read this stuff, but I hadn't heard it. The cadences, the flow, the kind of endlessness of the prose, the way it just poured off. I was really stunning to me. His way of perceiving music, the way he wrote about music in America, and the road, the romance of the American highway, it struck me. It struck a primal chord. I felt familiar, something I wanted to join in. But it wasn't like a club. It was a way of seeing. It became so much a part of me that it's hard to measure. I can't separate who I am now from what I got from Kerouac. I don't know if I ever would have had the courage or the vision to do something outside with my life, or even suspected the possibilities existed, if it weren't for Kerouac opening those doors. Even the punk movement of the 70s and 80s considered William Burroughs one of their saints. Poetry readings in coffee houses and the crossing of various artistic media, music, poetry, film, photography, painting, and even acting, all were first attempted by the Beats. This is Dan Moran. I hope you're enjoying my program on Jack Kerouac and the Beat Generation, and we will continue next week here on the Long Island Radio Magazine for Poets Corner with a look at the Beat Generation and Jack Kerouac. Until next time.
Thank you, Dan. Dan Moran will continue his retrospective on Jack Kerouac next week.
Hi, this is Dan Moran, resident poet here at WPBX and the host of Poets Corner, with a special edition of the Long Island Radio Magazine devoted to the Beat Generation and in particular their spiritual father, Jack Kerouac. Last week I discussed the incredible influence of Kerouac not only on literature but on society and its attitudes toward writing, music, sex, politics, God, and personal freedom. No group of men had a greater influence than those of the Beat Generation, including people such as Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, William Burroughs, Gary Snyder, John Cleland Holmes, Michael McClure, Philip Whalen, and of course, Jack Kerouac. In some respects, the one they all wanted to be. He had written in obscurity for some 20 years. His first novel, The Town and the City, was a fine piece of work in the spirit of his hero, Thomas Wolfe, but did not get him noticed. It was not until 1957, with the publication of On the Road, that Kerouac was launched into the highest reaches of celebrity and recognition by his peers. Gilbert Milstein wrote in the New York Times that On the Road was a major novel, an authentic work of art that would define his generation. Just before Christmas in 1957, Milstein approached Max Gordon, the owner of the legendary Village Vanguard, and asked if he would consider featuring Kerouac reading from his work to a jazz accompaniment, to which he agreed. His first show fell flat with no accompaniment at all, but for the second show, Steve Allen, who's the host of the Plymouth show, was summoned from the audience to play piano. It went so well that in March of 1958, the two met at a New York recording studio. Kerouac arrived from Florida with a suitcase full of his writing and said to Steve Allen, "What shall I read?" Allen said, "Anything you want." Allen began to stroke the piano. Kerouac read from papers extracted haphazardly from the suitcase. 1 hour later, they stopped. The engineer said, "That was a great first take." Allen said, "That's the only take." Kerouac made 3 albums. This one called Poetry for the Beat Generation with Steve Allen. Only 25 copies were pressed for this album, which Rhino Records has reissued on a CD. Here once again is the rich, beautiful voice of Jack Kerouac, along with the amazing improvisational piano of Steve Allen, performing several pieces as they sounded that day in 1958, in one take. We'll start off with October in the Railroad Earth.
There was a little alley in San Francisco, back of the Southern Pacific Station at 3rd and Townsend, in red brick of drowsy, lazy afternoons with everybody at work in offices. In the air you feel the impending rush of their commuter frenzy. As soon they'll be charging en masse from Market and Sansom buildings on foot and in buses and all well-dressed through working man Frisco of walk-up truck drivers. And even the poor grime-bemarked 3rd Street of lost bums, even Negroes so hopeless and long left east, and meanings of responsibility and try, that now all they do is stand there spitting in the broken glass, sometimes 50 in one afternoon against one wall at 3rd and Howard. There's all these Millbrae and San Carlos neat necktied producers and commuters of America and steel civilization rushing by with San Francisco Chronicles and green call bulletins, not even enough time to be disdainful. They've got to catch 130, 132, 134, 136, all the way up to 146, till the time of evening supper in homes of the railroad earth, when high in the sky the magic stars ride above the following hot-shot freight trains. It's all in California. It's all a sea. I swim out of it in afternoons of sun-hot meditation in my jeans with head on handkerchief on brakeman's lantern, or, if not working, on book. I look up at blue sky of perfect lost purity and feel the warp of wood of old America beneath me. And I have insane conversations with Negroes in second-story windows above, and everything is pouring in. The switching moves of boxcars in that little alley, which is so much like the alleys of Lowell, and I hear far off in the sense of coming night that engine calling our mountains. But it was that beautiful cut of clouds I could always see above the little SP alley, puffs floating by from Oakland, or the gate of Marin to the north, or San Jose south. The clarity of Cal to break your heart. It was the fantastic drowse and drum hum of lum mum afternoon, nothing to do. Old Frisco with end of land sadness. The people, the alley full of trucks and cars of businesses nearabouts. Nobody knew or far from cared who I was all my life. 3,500 miles from birth, all opened up, and at last belonged to me in great America. And now it's night in 3rd Street. The keen little neons, and also yellow bulb lights of impossible-to-believe flops. The dark, ruined shadows moving back of torn yellow shades like a degenerate China with no money. The cats in Annie's alley. The flop comes on. moans, rolls. The street is loaded with darkness. Blue sky above with stars hanging high over old hotel roofs and blowers of hotels moaning out dusts of interior. The grime inside the word-in mouths is falling out tooth by tooth. The reading rooms tick-tock, big clock with creak chair and slant boards and old faces looking up over rimless spectacles bought in some West Virginia or Florida or Liverpool, England pawn shop long before I was born. And across rains, they've come to the end of the land sadness, end of the world gladness. All your San Francisco will have to fall eventually and burn again. But I'm walking, and one night, a bum fell into the hole of the construction job where they're tearing a sewer by day. The husky Pacific and Electric youths in torn jeans who work there, often I think of going up to some of them like, say, blonde ones with wild hair and torn shirts, and they say, "You ought to apply for the railroad. It's much easier work. You don't stand around the street all day and you get much more pay." But this bum fell in the hole. You saw his foot stick out. British MG, also driven by some eccentric, once backed into that hole. And as I came home from a long Saturday afternoon local, the Hollister, out of San Jose, miles away across verdurous fields of prune and juice joy, here's this British MG backed and legs up, wheels up into a pit, and bums and cops standing right outside the coffee shop. It was the way they fenced it, but he never had the nerve to do it due to the fact that he had no money and nowhere to go, and his father was dead, and his mother was dead, and his sister was dead, and his whereabout was dead. But and then at that time also, I used to lay in my room on long Saturday afternoons listening to Jumpin' George with my fifth of Tokay, no tea, and just under the sheets laugh to hear the crazy music. Mama, he treats your daughter mean. Mama, Papa, don't you come in here, I'll kill you, etc. Getting high by myself in room glooms, and all wondrous knowing about the Negro, the essential American, out there, always finding his solace, his meaning in the Fellaheen street, and not in abstract morality. And even when he has a church, you see the pastor out front bowing to the ladies on the make. You hear his great vibrant voice on the Sunday afternoon sidewalk full of sexual vibratos, saying, "Why, yes, man, but the gospel do say that man was born of woman's womb." No, and so, by that time I come crawling out of my warm sack and hit the street. When I see the railroad ain't going to call me till 5 a.m. Sunday morning, probably, for a local out of Bay Shore. In fact, always for a local out of Bay Shore. And I go to the whale bar of all the wild bars in the world, the one and only 3rd and Howard. And there I go in and drink with the madmen, and if I get drunk, I get. The girl who come up to me in there one night, I was there with Al Buckle, said to me, "You want to play with me tonight, Jim?" And I didn't think I had enough money. And I told this to Charlie Lowe, and he laughed, said, "How do you know she wanted money? Always take the chance that she might be out just for love, or just out for love. You know what I mean? Don't be a sucker." She was a good-looking doll. She said, "How would you like to ulyuku with me, Mon?" And I stood there like a jerk. In fact, bought drink, got drink drunk that night in the 299 Club. I was hit by the proprietor, the band breaking up the fight, before I had a chance to decide to hit him back, which I didn't want to do anyway. And out on the street, I tried to rush back in, but they had locked the door and were looking at me through the forbidden glass in the door with faces like undersea. I should have played with her shoo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Charlie Parker looked like Buddha. Charlie Parker, who recently died laughing at a juggler on TV after weeks of strain and sickness, was called the perfect musician. And his expression on his face was as calm, beautiful, and profound as the image of the Buddha represented in the East. The lidded eyes, the expression that says, "All is well." This was what Charlie Parker said when he played. All is well. You had the feeling of early in the morning, like a hermit's joy, or like the perfect cry of some wild gang at a jam session, wail, whop. Charlie burst his lungs to reach the speed of what the speedsters wanted, and what they wanted was his eternal slow down. A great musician and a great creator of forms that ultimately find expression in mores and what have you. Musically as important as Beethoven, yet not regarded as such at all. A genteel conductor of string orchestras, in front of which he stood, proud and calm, like a leader of music in the great historic world night, and wailed his little saxophone, the alto, with piercing clear lament, in perfect tune and shining harmony, toot, as listeners reacted without showing it, and began talking, and soon the whole joint is rocking and talking, and everybody talking, and Charlie Parker whistling them on to the brink of eternity with his Irish St. Patrick batoodle stick. And like the holy mist, we blop and we plop in the waters of slaughter and white meat and die one after one in time. And how sweet a story it is when you hear Charlie Parker tell it, either on records or at sessions or at official bits and clubs, shots in the arm for the wallet. Gleefully, he whistled the perfect horn. Anyhow, it made no difference. Charlie Parker, forgive me. Forgive me for not answering your eyes. For not having made an indication of that which you can devise. Charlie Parker, pray for me. Pray for me and everybody. In the nirvanas of your brain, where you hide, indulgent and huge, no longer Charlie Parker, with a secret unsayable name that carries with it merit, not to be measured from here to up, down, east, or west. Charlie Parker, lay the bane off me and everybody. The wheel of the quivering meat conception turns in the void, expelling human beings, pigs, turtles, frogs, insects, nits, mice, lice, lizards, rats, roan racing horses, poxy, bucolic pig ticks, horrible, unnameable lice of vultures, murderous attacking dog armies of Africa, rhinos roaming in the jungle, vast boars, and huge, gigantic bull elephants, rams, eagles, condors, pomes, and porcupines, and pills. All the endless conception of living beings, gnashing everywhere in consciousness, throughout the 10 directions of space, occupying all the quarters in and out, from super-microscopic no-bug to huge galaxy light-year bowel illuminating the sky of one mind. Poor. I wish I was free of that slaving meat wheel, safe in heaven dead. goofy, foolish, human parade passing on Sunday art streets of Greenwich Village. Pitiful drawings of images on an iron fence ranged there by self-believing artists with no hair and black berets, showing green seas eating at rock and Pleiades of time, pestiferating at moon squid, salt flat-tipped fly-toed tat sand traps, with cigar-smoking interesteds puffing at the stroll. I mean sincerely, naive sailors buying prints. Women with red banjos on their handbags, and art's handicrafty, slow-shuffling artists of Washington Square, passing in what they think is a happy June afternoon. Good God, the sorrow. They don't even listen to me when I try to tell them they will die. They say, of course I know I'll die. Why should you mention it now? Why should I worry about it? It'll happen now. I want a good time. Excuse me, it's a beautiful, happy June afternoon I want to walk in. Why are you so tragic and gloomy? And on the corner at the pony stables on 6th Avenue and 4th sits Bodhisattva meditating in hobo rags, praying at Joe Gould's chair for the emancipation of the shufflers passing by. Immovable in meditation, he offers his hand and feet to the passers-by, and nobody believes that there's nothing to believe in. Listen to me. There is no sidewalk art show. No strollers are there. No poem here. No June afternoon of with only imagelessness, unrepresented on the iron fence of bald artists with black berets passing by. One moment less than this is future nothingness already. The chessmen are silent, assembling ready for funny war. Voices of Washington Square blues rise to my Bodhisattva poem window. I will describe them. Itki salusu flutert, etc. No need, no words to describe the sound of ignorance. This is the sound of ignorance. They are strolling to their death, watching the pictures of hell, eating ice cream of ignorance on wood sticks that were once sincere in trees. But I can't write poetry, just prose. I mean, this is prose, not poetry. But I want to be sincere.
Ironically, the beginning of Kerouac's legend was also the beginning of the end. The shy, introspective loner was immediately ill at ease with celebrity, only wanting to write and be read. The beats quickly became a caricature. Men with goatees and berets, Maynard G. Krebs, and people saying "cool it daddy-o" and wanting to be hepcats were called beatniks, and quickly became the image most Americans saw. There were people hanging out and hanging on and embracing a decadence which they thought was the beat lifestyle. In all of this, what got lost was the beats. Kerouac retreated from the insanity by retreating to a home in Northport he shared with his mother. Many nights he was dragged out by rowdies and admirers to some local pub where he drank himself to unconsciousness night after night. Like many writers, he was actually inspired and propelled forward by rejection and being outside the establishment. In one day, he became a hero to some, and to many more, the personification of all of America's fears about itself, about the anarchy that resides in all of us. He could not cope with the extremes of being canonized and despised at the same time. The first casualty of the beat insurrection, the beat phenomenon. He climbed into a bottle and stayed there until October 1969. He had told friends years before that being a Catholic he could not kill himself, but he could drink himself to death. On October 22nd of 1969, his stomach began to hemorrhage, drowning him in his own blood. If one were to agree with Mallarmé that poetry is the language of a state of crisis, then Kerouac's crisis was over. But what he left behind him, ironically, was a picture of exhilaration, of an abject joy at being alive. Perhaps he loved this world so much that he could not bear the thought of his own mortality. Listen now in closing to an interview with Steve Allen on the Steve Allen Plymouth Show from November 16, 1959. Allen had asked Kerouac to read from On the Road to Allen's piano musings. The effect is enchanting.
Well, a lot of people have asked me why did I write that book or any book. All the stories I wrote were true because I believed in what I saw. I was traveling west one time at the junction of the state line of Colorado, its arid western one, and the state line of poor Utah. I saw in the clouds, huge and massed above the fiery golden desert of Evenfall, the great image of God with forefinger pointed straight at me, through halos and rolls and gold folds that were like the existence of the gleaming spear in his right hand, which saith, "Come on, boy, go thou across the ground. Go moan for man. Go moan. Go groan. Go groan alone. Go roll your bones alone. Go thou and be little beneath my sight. Go thou and be minute as seed in the pod. Go thou, die hence. And of this world report you well and truly." Anyway, I wrote the book because we're all gonna die. In the loneliness of my life, my father dead, my brother dead, my mother far away, my sister and my wife far away. Nothing here but my own tragic hands that once were guarded by a world, a sweet attention, that now are left to guide and disappear their own way into the common dark of all our death. Sleeping in me raw bed alone and stupid, with just this one pride and consolation. My heart broke in the general despair and opened up inwards to the Lord. I made a supplication in this dream. So in the last page of On the Road, I describe how the hero, Dean Moriarty's come to see me all the way from the West Coast just for a day or two. We've just been back and forth across the country several times in cars, and now our adventures are over. We're still great friends, but we have to go into later phases of our lives. So there he goes, Dean Moriarty, ragged in the moth-eaten overcoat he brought specially for the freezing temperatures of the East, walking off alone, and last I saw him, he rounded the corner of 7th Avenue, eyes on the street ahead, and bent to it again. Gone. So, in America, when the sun goes down, and I sit on the old broken-down river pier watching the long, long skies over New Jersey and sense all that raw land that rolls in one unbelievable huge bulge over to the West Coast, and all that road going, and all the people dreaming in the immensity of it. In an hour, I know by now that children must be crying in the land where they let the children cry. And tonight the stars will be out, and don't you know that God is Pooh Bear? The evening star must be drooping and shedding her sparkler dims on the prairie, which is just before the coming of complete night that blesses the earth, darkens all the rivers, cups the peaks, and folds the final shore in. Nobody knows what's going to happen to anybody besides the forlorn rags of growing old. Think of Dean Moriarty, I even think of old Dean Moriarty, the father we never found. Think of Dean Moriarty, I think of Dean Moriarty.
Well, it seems half the world claims to have gotten drunk with Jack Kerouac. The rest wish they had. I hope you've enjoyed the genius and invention of America's own Jack Kerouac here on Poets Corner on the Long Island Radio Magazine. This is Dan Moran, your host, hoping you'll join me again next time. This is your Long Island public radio station, 88.3 FM, WPBX in Southampton, New York. Until next time.